Dame Sarr, which once seemed like he'd be a Jayhawk, is he now going to go to Duke? Is him to KU no more thing? Where the heck does KU go from here?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. Thank you for tuning in, whether it's on YouTube or anywhere that you get your podcast. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we are discussing Dame Sarr, who KU was recruiting, going through the recruiting dance with, and maybe was in a favorable position. And then all of a sudden, all sorts of panic and talk today that is Dame Sarr going to be going to Duke? Is Dame Sarr with Kansas no longer a thing? What it all means, what's going on, where does KU pivot from here if Sarr is no longer an option? And then a little bit just kind of overarching thoughts on where we are with recruiting, both in terms of Kansas and I think just overall at this point in time on this episode of the show. Let's dig right into it, though, with Dame Sarr. So if you're new to who this is, and thank you if you're an everydayer and already caught our Dame Sarr deep dive from a couple of weeks ago. But Dame Sarr is an 18-year-old prospect from FC Barcelona, playing in Spain, arguably the best league outside of the NBA in the world. Started to get some real playing time on the senior team. His last 5 games averaged over 12 points per game, which he's playing with a lot of, late 20, early 30-year-old former NBA players or established veterans. And somebody who is seen as essentially what would be a 5-star prospect coming over from the international ranks that could possibly be a first-round draft pick in 2026 that was being projected to be even an early second-round draft pick that could maybe work his way into the late first if he would have entered in this year's draft, but he obviously opted not to and instead go the college route of things. And Kansas had him in Lawrence for a visit just kind of late last week. Things were kind of quiet afterwards, but it seemed like Kansas had put themselves in a favorable position, that they had put themselves in a good spot to be. And honestly, there were some recent predictions that were starting to gather steam, that were starting to gather momentum, that Kansas was going to be in a good spot to land Dame Sarr. I think there was a crystal ball prediction on 24/7 Sports from Travis Branham, who is like a national college basketball writer for them. I think somebody from On3 predicted Kansas to land him. I think there was some talk from, Jayhawk Slant with Shea Wildeboer, and there was some talk from Trilly Donovan that Kansas was trending in the right direction here with him. I think Mike Vernon talked about it too. Like, I don't bring all these guys up to throw them under the bus. I bring this all up to say that, like, there were a lot of people expecting this to happen. It almost feels like, remember the McKenzie and Baco recruiting, where it's like everybody was saying he's going to go to Kansas, and then on the day of, he ends up picking Indiana. And so this was one, though, where it was a little different, because instead of it being, okay, all of a sudden on the day of, something different happens, whether it was Mark Cuban writing the check on the day of or whatever. This was one where it's like, okay, the days keep coming by. Why is he not committing? Is he waiting for something from Duke? And you add it up, Duke had gotten Cedric Coward to commit to them, and Coward is doing really well in the NBA draft process. So is Coward going to stay in the draft, and does that lead Duke to believe, hey, he's going to stay in the draft, we need to find a backup plan? And maybe Dame Sarr all the way along wanted to play for Duke, and that wasn't an option because they brought on Coward. And if now Coward, that option is looking like more he's going to be in the NBA, now all of a sudden that first option comes, and he's like, you know what? Maybe I was thinking about coming to KU, but now that that's an option, I didn't know that was an option, right? You go to dinner, and you're in the middle of ordering, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to take the filet mignon, and I'm going to do this and that. And then all of a sudden the waiter goes, hey, by the way, did you know we have a tomahawk or we have a Wagyu beef on special today? And you're like, oh, wait, hold on. Actually, I'm going to go with this. And I felt weird, saying that Duke is Wagyu and Kansas is filet, because they're both blue bloods, but you get the point. Like, that is what maybe he prefers. Now, I will say this whole thing has felt like just a runaround in a real way, because this was somebody who I think at one point in time there were reports that he was going to be transferred in the European market to go to an Italian league team, but then he kind of backed out last minute. There was obviously the thing that caused him to leave the Barcelona team, or kind of have a mutual parting of ways, with the whole Nike Hoop Summit, which was something that I just kind of viewed as, honestly, like, if they agreed to it beforehand for him to go over, I can understand why he continued to want to go over. But then again, he also left going over and missed their rivalry game to do so they part ways. You have that. Apparently, he verbally committed to Illinois, and apparently he verbally committed to Kansas. It seems to be the talk down the grapevine, and now possibly going to Duke. Now, there's two ways of spinning that. One way is that if the talk is right now he's going to go to Duke, who's to say that there's not a change of heart? Who's to say that there's not a change of mind? Who's to say that there's not more bidding that could be done from either way, either team, that could change things up for him to reverse trend and end up coming to Kansas, right? I mean, I guess with the way things have changed so much, I wouldn't rule anything out, but it certainly seems like this has all been kind of one big, I don't know, ruse in a weird way that has led to this possibly happening at Duke. And it's almost been like you know what, I guess I'll go there, but I really want to go to Duke. But the Duke thing's not a possibility. I guess I'll go there instead. Okay, I'm taking too long, so Illinois is going to bring on Andrej Stojakovic. And then it's like you keep getting down that road, and then finally the Duke thing comes up, and maybe that is what kind of changes things over. So I think this leaves KU in a very precarious spot because KU in a real way was swinging for the fences with Dame Sarr. He's a high potential player. He's a player who, if he had a good season in his 1 year of college basketball, potentially could be a possible first round draft pick. That is a very highly talented player. And for a Kansas team that already has Darryn Peterson, possible number one pick in the 2026 NBA draft, Floyd Badunga, possible first round draft pick, it'd be pretty impactful to have three players who could be possible first round draft picks in terms of raising your ceiling, especially after a year in which Kansas has had 0 players invited to the NBA draft combine for the first time in a long time. So this leaves KU kind of swinging missing on a prospect, and you're not going to bat 1,000. You're not going to bat, and hit a home run every time in recruiting. Like sometimes other schools are going to beat you. Sometimes you're just not going to want to go that far for the money or for this and that. Like there's going to be different reasons why you do or don't land certain targets. This one certainly stings if he did indeed commit to the KU staff and they did feel like they got to that good point. In a weird way, like, it's almost like a reverse transfer, like in the way that, okay, when a kid leaves your program as a transfer that you didn't want them to, they join the team, they commit to you, and then they later transfer. This is almost that, except you just never got to, have him be on the team actually, and actually have him, play with the team. And so for Kansas, you just continue to get further down the line where you're like, okay, the more targets that pick somewhere else, especially ones that you thought you had a good shot of, the smaller that pool of players that you want to bring in becomes. Because when we're talking about the scholarships that are left to fill for Kansas, the backup big man market and the decoy role market and the developmental player market, like, sure, that stuff is dwindling down too, but it's a much easier find to find one guy to fit that specific role than it is to find a player who you're looking to be another stud for your team. And that market is really dwindling, and the time is starting to run out. Now, there's still time. The NBA draft deadline isn't until like May 28th, so that's going to be the real big question. Like the first week of June is really when, because that'll be after that, and then you get visits and decide who's available and stuff like that. But you are running out of options here, and there still are a decent amount of holes. There still are a decent amount of questions for this KU roster and how Bill Self is going to conclude out this offseason for KU. So where do you go from here? Is it an all-out pursuit of Darrion Williams? Is it somebody else in the international market? Let's discuss that next. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Wayfair. The days are getting longer, the weather's warming up, and people are spending more time outside, which means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space. Whether you're working with a big backyard or a small balcony, Wayfair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. Wayfair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation set to sleek dining tables and outdoor decor, they've got it all. And at prices that fit your budget. The delivery's free and hassle-free, even for the big stuff. There's nothing worse than having to move like a big table. Well, they're making it hassle-free for you. And whether you're entertaining guests or just relaxing solo, shop Wayfair to help you unwind. Shop a huge selection of outdoor furniture online. This summer, get outside with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home with Wayfair. Thanks for joining us on Locked on Jayhawks. Thanks for making this your first listen every day. And don't forget, you can check out Locked on College Basketball to maybe catch national headlines of what's going on around the country with KU and everything. So if they're not landing Dame Sarr, which again, at time of recording, as much as we're talking about this, and this seems to be the rumors, I haven't seen an actual commitment. Now, maybe when I hit the record button here and I've been talking, maybe it's since happened since I've started recording, but I guess you still try, you still see if you can lob maybe a little bit more money. It does feel like Duke's in a favorable position in terms of the money that they have and kind of operating at a different level with Nike backing them and, what they kind of have just in general. I know there was a rumor at one point about that Duke hit it big in the stock market with some fund at one point in time, a couple of years ago. And that's making the money, which imagine if that was just part of it with all the market volatility that had been going on with some of the tariff stuff. I don't mean to get political. I'm just talking about market volatility to where some of the stocks were up and down. What if they were a month ago? What if when the stock market was down, Duke was crap, we can't afford him. And now that the stock market is worked its way back up a little bit there. What if Duke is now we can afford him? Buy. That would be very interesting if that was the case. That teams are playing the stock market to figure out what their NIL budget is that specific year. But anyway, at this point in time, Kansas needs another stud. You need another, possible all Big 12, another top 20 player in the Big 12, probably even better than that, top 15, top 10 player in the Big 12 to pair with Darryn Peterson. Because at this point in time, I think Peterson's going to be a stud. I think Flory's going to have a really good season for KU. But you have a lot of role players around it. And I think that's great. I've loved the fact that the staff has gone for fit in the portal over just grabbing a bunch of stars like last year, grabbing the flashy sale in front of you like they did last season. But you still do need that one kind of star to carry it along. And this guy would have been the potential there. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that Dame Sarr in college is going to work in 1 year, right? He is a a low floor, high potential player, right? He could come in and struggle to adjust. And as good as the defensive potential is with his length and athleticism, there are times he gets caught off the ball and this and that. The three-point shooting numbers look good, but do we know they're good for sure? It's been small sample size, and some of the scouts seem to think it's going to be inconsistent. So, there is no guarantee. Point being, there is a chance that and this is not me trying to be sour grapes. No, you didn't want him anyway. Go get somebody and they'll be better. No, I wanted Kansas to get Dame Sarr. I think it would have been a fun fit to have him on the team. But there is a real chance, if we're having an honest conversation about this, that a player you bring in via the portal, like a Darrion Williams, like an RJ Lewis, if you're able to do that, is a more proven college player and has a better college season in 2025 to 2026 than what you would have gotten from Dame Sarr. No guarantee for that, and the ceiling for Sarr is higher, but that doesn't mean that the floor or what the actual outcome is ends up being the case. So this is not panic mode. It just continues to inch a little closer to that, if that makes sense, because it's one less target. It's another day where you're getting closer to, and especially from the standpoint of, I guess, the time and resources and the effort that you put into landing him and then thinking you're going to do it, does that cost you somewhere else? Maybe it doesn't, but is the opportunity cost of the time you spent recruiting him, could that have gone to another player to where you could have wrapped him up? I don't know. I do think at this point in time, there's things more important than just the time spent with the recruit to bring him on, and we'll get to that in our third segment here, that I don't know that it will matter that much, but yeah. So Darrion Williams is the one that makes the most sense to kind of go all-out pursuit, and there was a video posted by Isaac Trotter, who does really good work with 24/7 Sports, kind of interviewing Darrion Williams and kind of talking about the draft process, and Williams kind of mentions that he's all in on the draft process, and he's not really thinking about his college stuff right now, so, take that for what it's worth, but I don't know. I think at this point, what do you expect him to say? Oh yeah, the draft process, I don't know that I'm doing that well, so I'm going to come back to school. He's going to want to be all for what he does. So I don't know what to think too much, but it is interesting that he continues to stress the idea that he's in the draft process all the way. And the same was with RJ Lewis, who came out with a quote that today earlier. So those are two guys who are at the top of the list at this point for Kansas, but there's a chance that either or both of them stays in the NBA draft. And then, of course, you have Jamir Watkins, right? Who I don't think is as good of a player or fit as those two guys, but would still be a good addition for Kansas overall. And he's someone who isn't with Lewis and Williams, you can find mock drafts where both of them are being drafted. Both are being drafted maybe, or one or the other is being drafted in the top 45 or top 50. You don't see it as often with Jamir Watkins, but he also is older. So he might be wanting to get his professional career started, right, in a real way. So I think it's going to be interesting what happens there. There's also been some interesting, I guess, recent talk about could KU possibly have interest or get involved with like Boogie Fland, the transfer from Arkansas. So maybe we'll do a deep dive on him later on, either this week or next week. There was also some interesting news about Tyron Stokes, the number one recruit in the class of 2026. So we've talked a lot about here. And by all accounts, everything we've heard is that he is not reclassifying. At the same point in time, Kansas really needs a player, and he was supposed to be visiting Kentucky, and they are delaying that. Now, could that just be as innocuous as, oh, hey, we're going to a graduation party, or we're doing this or that, and we just had to delay it? Like, yes, it absolutely could. But a lot of times in recruiting, sometimes you can read between the lines, and it's like, is he postponing that visit? Because, especially when it happens right after the Dame Sarr rumors start flying around, did Kansas go, hey, we were able to raise a bunch of money for Dame Sarr, we'll double the offer, whatever we're sending you. Maybe not that extreme, but you get my point. I don't know. That's not something I'm expecting, but it is at least worth bringing up because I'm just kind of grasping at hopeful straws over here. But it is an interesting question because, again, if Kansas ends up landing Darrion Williams or RJ Lewis, you end up okay with all of this, right? It does get rid of the dream scenario where, like, could you have landed Dame Sarr and Darrion Williams? I guess we would never know there. But does that make it possible where you could land a Darrion Williams and an RJ Lewis? I don't know. I think that would be interesting too. Now, what happens? What is the disaster scenario if they don't land Darrion Williams or they don't land Dame Sarr, obviously? And then let's say RJ Lewis stays in the NBA draft too. And then Jameer Watkins either goes to the NBA or another school. At that point, where do you go on the list? It sounds like Desmond Cloud or Claude, whatever, that could be somewhere else with his recruiting, like maybe a Northwest school or something like that. But is it more international players? And that's the beauty of the international thing. Like, we don't see a public board of these are the 5 stars in the international game. It just feels like you get a new one every day that you're like, okay, sounds like he's pretty interesting. Oh, he's done some good things. Like, could he make sense? So there have been a couple guys that maybe KU's been linked over there, or that, maybe makes sense to pivot if they're already kind of working the international market, if they're already talking to international agents. I'm sure there's somebody else they can pivot to. And I don't know how common the same agencies are with a player like Sarr with other players in Europe, but like, I guess theoretically, one, with how this has gone, do you really want to work with that same agency again? I don't know, maybe not. But like, I'm sure that same agency is going, well, if he really, we know you had this money to give to Dame Sarr theoretically. Hey, we have another one of our clients who's pretty good. Would you be interested in giving that to them? Right? That could be something that certainly makes sense. But it just feels like we're at a point right now where we just need some good KU basketball news. Like, we just need something. We just need some sort of commit to make it feel like things are going back in the right direction again, right? And I still think they're going to be okay. I trust in, I mean, for the longest time, Springville, when they needed it, they got it, right? And you're running out of options for we need it, but they still got some. And I'm not going to count against him in what they're going to be able to do in the portal, but obviously it would be a big loss if Dame Sarr does end up committing to Duke in the end. All right, I have some thoughts just on recruiting as a whole now, because I don't know, this has kind of broken my spirits in one regard. So let's get to that next. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, coming out a little early on your Wednesday night for our Thursday episode, just because of some of the news and wanting to get this out there as soon as possible. We'll have another episode coming at you later this week. Maybe we'll do a deep dive on a player like Boogie Fland or one of the international players that we've seen have stuff with KU, or I don't know, maybe we'll get into some Darryn Peterson stuff just to get a little positive swish out there. I don't know. We'll figure that out in a day or two. Anyway, I just have some thoughts because this was something we talked about on a previous episode. Would Darryn Peterson have an impact on KU recruiting? Would other players sit there and go, I want to team up. I want to play with Darryn Peterson? Maybe it has a little bit. Like, maybe it was part of the decision with a guy like Jaden Dawson to be like, hey, I can play off ball and be a 3-point shooter off Peterson. Maybe it is something for guys like Melvin Council and stuff like that. But as far as like the star recruits and as far as finding the backup big man, it doesn't really seem to have an impact or hasn't had an impact. And I don't say that to that it's like a negative against Darryn Peterson. I don't think that's what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is I think we're now at a point where it doesn't really matter. A team could sign, when LeBron James was coming out of high school, And, if the two offers, if the two NIL offers are equal from two different schools, maybe that's the tiebreaker for which one he chooses. But it's not going to be like the NIL and the playing time. That is all that matters. That is the most important thing. And so if you have a kid who, hey, I can play with Darryn Peterson and I'm going to make, and again, I'm just making up numbers here, and I'm going to make $2 million to play with Darryn Peterson and have all the NBA scouts there and get to watch it and get to start, versus I'm going to get $3 million to get to start on a worse team, not play with Darryn Peterson. I'm taking the $3 million. And maybe that's too extreme because $1 million is a big deal, right? I would love to make $1 million, right? But like, if it's 2.4 million versus 2 million and the 2.4 doesn't play with Peterson, I'm sure there would be some guys that would take the Peterson, but that number of players is very minuscule at this point. The money talks. The money is what matters most at this point in time. And so it almost just doesn't matter. It's all about money and playing time. And so it's interesting because I think from the KU backup big position, you're probably running into a bit of a snag with the second part of that, playing time. Guys want to go somewhere that they can start and play a big role. And then you have the money aspect of it, the money element of all of this, right? That is the most important thing in the world. And so, yes, again, our KU's great facilities and the rich tradition and the history and the Adidas backing and the cool uniforms they get to wear and all that stuff. Does it matter? Yes, absolutely it does. But like, again, those things are tiebreakers. Like if you were to put a pie chart together, what are the most important things? This would be my guess. I would almost feel like it would be like 50% NIL, 40% playing time, and then the other 10% would be some combination of like head coach. Do you get players to the NBA? Those would probably be the top two among the other 10%. The facilities, like, the tradition, stuff like that, it makes up a much smaller portion. And it's the truth of the matter. And again, like I don't blame kids because like you want to play. You want to maximize your earnings because you don't know what you're going to do at the next level, especially for a lot of these kids who maybe they don't have NBA prospects in store for them. And so like I don't blame them for doing it. At the same point in time, it does take away the soul of recruiting. It does take away the soul of the sell of, selling to mom and dad that you're going to protect the kid and that you're going to develop the kid and you're going to do it in the best interest. It's transactional now. It takes away the soul of college athletics and college sports and college basketball. And maybe that's not the point. Maybe, we've been sold on that by the NCAA when that was never a viable option, but it's just a different game. And like, I guess I'm kind of away from a point of, in future years being like, well, KU has this player or KU has this thing going for them and that's going to help them in recruiting. No. Do you have the money? Do you have the playing time available? And then for the role players, yeah, that stuff comes in more, right? Like I said, I'm sure for the Jaden Dawsons and Melvin Councils of the world, that stuff matters more because maybe they're not getting $3 million in NIL. But for Darrion Williams, for Dame Sarr, for these top tier recruits, the money talks, playing time and role opportunity, that's what goes with it. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. And we'll be back with you to talk more KU basketball later this week on Locked On Jayhawks.